Good morning on this beautiful sunny Friday morning. On behalf of Phelps, it's a pleasure to be here with you today in the flesh in this gorgeous studio here in the town of Ajax. We've been enjoying sessions all week, learning, and we're thrilled to be here today, co-sponsoring the opening keynote with Durham College. Like you, we believe in the need to build capacity, raise awareness, and innovate in the field of online protection. With 34 years of human capital experience, we have developed a holistic and collaborative approach as we work with organizations across Canada, both in the public and in the private sectors. Phelps has been active on the cybersecurity front, ensuring programs and services support the needs of the sector, whether it be by placing people in key leadership positions, providing executive coaching, or designing leadership and talent development programs. As we know, the world is facing a chronic shortage of cybersecurity talent as new technologies and new threats increase. We need to understand these major global forces and then intersect them to gain a strong competitive advantage. All we have to do is look at what's unfolding in front of us to know how important the work you do safeguards and secures our society. Let's look at the numbers. $3 billion price tag in cybercrime in Canada alone. $500 million being invested right now across the country over the next few years, and only 11,000 professionals currently working in the industry. Not enough to meet the demand, a demand that will see over a 60% increase in the next couple years. We know today's landscape of escalating cybercrime demands a new kind of leadership resiliency. Cyber leaders will need to not only protect organizational data, but be equipped to take on the leadership of making critical decisions, mitigating risk, and advancing policies to respond to future scenarios of disruption. Ironically, while the cybersecurity industry is fueled by technology, I believe our focus needs to be human-centric. We need to anticipate how we will support future workers, create cutting-edge training, and find organizational flexibility and diversity. While technical skills and aptitudes are critical in this world, every day we hear our clients tell us they need more. They need more soft skills. The CISO's office has a fine balance between authority and accountability, and CISOs are realizing more and more their teams need key strengths around relationship building skills, communication and influence abilities, and openness to listen and learn from their colleagues. And last, but certainly not least, we all need to drive diversity and equity into every one of our cyber teams. We at Phelps are committed to this industry, and as you pivot from what was to what will be, we are here for you, open to sharing our research, our experience, and our advice as you develop your human capital plans for 2020 and beyond. And now, to address some of the major themes affecting us, I would like to get to my introduction and welcome a partner of ours at Phelps and a friend of mine, Abbas Hirji. As most of you likely know, Ali is a key figure at Durham College and within the region, where he leads Durham's AI Hub and Center for Cybersecurity Innovation, and is also the lead on siberXchange's advisory panel. Ali studied in the United Arab Emirates and briefly in the United Kingdom before moving to Canada in 2007 for a second undergraduate degree. He continued to pursue his master's as well as his doctorate and has held numerous roles in both the private and the public sectors since arriving. Ali's interest in smart communities emerged after studying the infamous lunchbox delivery system in India. Founded in the 1890s and still today has an error rate of only 1 in 16 million deliveries. I guess the question, however, is whether smart communities are intended to be error-free. I would now like to welcome Ali on stage to discuss the uncertainties of smart communities through his talk, The House on a Bridge. Ali.
Jayson, thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Cheers. Pleasure's all mine. Thank you for that. Well, if I can sort of take off from where Jayson left off, and I'll take one little piece of his before I introduce myself, and that was this aspect of what do we mean when we talk about authority and agility. The bridge between authority and agility is trust. And what Jayson was alluding to was that cybersecurity professionals really have, besides their skill sets, have an element of trust. You walk with them on a bridge of trust. You share with them your ideas. You share with them your goals. You share with them the future state that you want to achieve. You trust them. You walk that bridge with them. Just like many of us, when it comes to the lives of our peers, the lives of our families, the society we live in, we've emphasized and invested trust in our government bodies, in our academic institutions, in our private sector bodies, and hopefully in ourselves as well. Welcome to this talk called The House on a Bridge, Uncertainties of Smart Communities. Now, I was thinking to myself, why would I title this The House on a Bridge? The truth of the matter is you wouldn't build a house on a bridge. Do a quick Google search, et voila, you'll find there are some houses on bridges. Ask yourself, how did they get there? Ask yourselves, who put them there? Ask yourselves, where I live today, the smart camera in front of my house, the smart lock, the smart meter inside my house, the ways in which I manage the temperature, the way in which I unlock doors, the way in which I monitor. How did it get there? Who put it there? How much trust do I invest in it? Notice I didn't say the problems or the errors with smart communities. I said the uncertainties. Ask yourself, look around you at this very moment, whether you're in your home office or in your office, and look at all the devices, what we call the IoT, the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Threats, if you will, and just wonder, who put them there, why, and how much trust have you invested in those devices? If we can stick with that real estate example just for a moment longer, as you all know, real estate market in Toronto, very, very hot. In the recent past, they've been talking a lot about digital transformation in real estate, of course, because of social distancing. And what is one of the things that real estate agents have been telling a lot of their clients lately? When you're in a home and you notice that there's a voice-activated device there, pay attention, don't mention a lot of what you're feeling. Leave the house and then talk and share what you think about that space. You see, in this process of becoming smart, if you don't understand the uncertainties, you could be outsmarted. We live in a world where we think that all of us share the same values, but there are bad actors. And let me tell you something. Dangerous actors out there, or what you call devils. What's more dangerous than a devil is an educated devil. At the level of knowledge that hackers, that bad actors have, ultimately render our smart systems as target numero uno. So by calling it the uncertainties of smart communities, I'm not referring to the fact that I don't subscribe to the idea of smart communities or smart living. I do. But I want that to be the case not just for us to be well thought about it, but well-rounded in our understandings of what do we mean when we utilize smart devices. Uncertainty is beautiful. Let's cherish that beauty with open eyes. Now, many of you are on siberXchange.ca. Well, all of you are if you're enjoying this keynote and that lovely opening by Jayson. And if I'm not mistaken, over the last 24 hours since the last education track panel, you've been enjoying a rerun of CISO Forum. Day 2, CISO Forum, believe it or not, a year ago. The first fireside chat held by IBM. Ray Bowaert hinted at a book. Rather, he referenced a book directly. What was that book called? Hopefully, if you heard that session, if not, make sure that you read it, check out the schedule. Ray Bowaert said, everybody, when it comes to understanding the criticality and the sensitivities of our infrastructure, need to read the book, The Ingenuity Gap. Why? Because he mentions that the author says, a Canadian author, by the way, who says, we've gone about trying to change all of our context. We've gone about trying to change the environment in which we live. However, where we are at right now, that very environment has become the change we're looking to achieve. What he means by that is we've tried to control certain elements around us. Now those elements are controlling us, in the sense that we have cameras in certain places which evoke fear, the fear of surveillance. When we talk about Sidewalk Labs Toronto, of course, you would think that that was the first place that I was going to talk about when it comes to uncertainty. Look at how surveillance formulated much of the challenges around getting that project through. Not just surveillance, but look at the fact that who's watching my data and who's using my data. You would imagine that if you provide your data to someone, for example, in a smart community, this is what time I entered my house, this is what time I left. You would imagine that if they tell you it's secure, great. But how do you know that the person inside that secure framework has the right trust and the right credentials to use that data? We're being controlled by the environment that we're in as opposed to vice versa. There's a lot of alarms around smart communities and the uncertainties. So my job today is to take you on a little bit of a journey. I'm going to take you on the story of history today, but I'm also going to take you on a little bit of a journey through the month of August and various things that happened in the world of smart communities going back all the way to 1993, just after the Cold War, and we were coming out of a recession. Some of you may be young enough to remember that the idea of a recession is not new. We've come out of some of them, or perhaps one would argue that we're in some of it right now, as early as 2008, 2009, with the housing crisis. If you look at what happened in 1993 and you go on this journey with me, you'll realize that the three fundamental aspects of smart communities borrow from the NIST framework of cybersecurity. And I'm looking forward to taking you along with me as we unpack what that framework is. Now that you're with me, let's go on a little bit of a story first. The first thing that I want to point your attention to is governance when it comes to smart communities. Let me tell you a story. A rabbit and a tortoise, very good friends. Friends for the last 5 to 10 years. One fine day, they decided to talk to each other about their powers. The power of running. Who's faster than whom? After discussing it for a couple of days, they decided to meet at the racetrack. And when they met at the racetrack, the conversation was, sure, whoever passes through first will be declared the winner and will thus be the fastest. And true to form, the rabbit begins. The tortoise tries to begin. The rabbit realizes in a couple of seconds that it's way past the tortoise. For a second, it looks back and says, I can't even see my friend. Life is good. I'm going to chill where I'm at right now. And chills under a tree, says, I'm going to rest for the next half an hour, and when I see the tortoise come, I'm going to keep running for a bit. Habit to form. The tortoise keeps moving. The rabbit falls asleep for a very, very long time. And the tortoise ultimately overcomes the rabbit and passes the finishing line because the rabbit goes into a deep slumber. Case in point, it's not just valuable to talk about the abilities that we have, it is important that we act upon them confidently and responsibly, aware of our context. I'm not saying that the way smart communities have evolved, in fact, some may argue smart communities go way back to the 1930s. I'm not saying that the way smart communities have evolved is not responsible. I'm saying there's a risk of being irresponsible. And that uncertainty is very much something we need to focus on. You look at the smart communities market today, many folks refer to it as smart cities, and I vehemently oppose that term. I thank the team at siberXchange for not calling it smart cities, but calling it smart communities, because this level of being smart can also apply to our rural locales. If you look at the investments in smart cities today, or smart communities as it should be called, it's said that as of today, it's approximately $95 billion worth of business globally around smart communities. This is expected to go to $235 billion within the next 7 to 10 years. India has promised to create 100 smart cities, 100 smart communities. And their neighboring rivals, China, has promised to create 500 smart communities, all with the goal of enhancing life experiences, all with the goal of trying to understand how can we improve our lives with data, how can we improve our lives through technology, through information systems and communication systems. Heck, forget India and China, Africa, which all of you know probably hosts about a quarter of the world's population, even there, the issue around smart communities is growing. And the talks around smart communities and the promise is growing ferociously. It's anticipated that by 2050, you'll have at least 20 to 30 unique examples of smart communities in Africa alone. So let's go on this journey and see what's been happening and where could we be headed to. And think about this metaphor of the house on a bridge. What got it there, and how much trust have we placed on that bridge? Speaking of trust, I want to begin with a definition of cybersecurity, but more importantly, I'm going to borrow from one of the players in the world of smart communities, Cisco. All of you know quite well Cisco and their current CEO, Rolla Dagger, who's doing an amazing job raising funds and raising awareness around what's happened in Beirut. I encourage you to check it out. Cisco has played a major role in the connected communities programming here in Canada. Forget Canada, around the world. I'm going to actually, towards the end, talk to you about what Cisco says about the uncertainties of smart communities, and hence I'm going to borrow from their playbook on what do we mean by cybersecurity. I'm going to read this out to you verbatim. According to Cisco, cybersecurity is the practice of protecting systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks. Remember, keep that metaphor in your mind, the metaphor of the bridge being the metaphor for trust. You trust the land on which you place your house. Do you trust that bridge? Do you trust that bridge of digital technology? Let's move on again. I'll read it for you once more. According to Cisco, cybersecurity is the practice of protecting systems. What do we mean by systems? Think about it. Networks and programs from digital attacks. Systems? Well, this system around me right now in this gorgeous facility here at the St. Francis Center in the town of Ajax. How do you protect these systems? How do you protect networks? The mere fact that I'm able to speak to you over a telecommunication network means that some level of IP, some level of thought, some level of interest is reaching you across a digital highway. How do you protect that highway? And programs. This, for example, siberXchange.ca is a program. Cyberexchange.ca and other sessions that we run, other environments where we engage are all programs. Similar to what we do in society. We exchange with each other. We have trust and networks with each other. We run programs for ourselves. Cybersecurity is about protecting these very elements. These cyber attacks are usually aimed at accessing, changing, or destroying sensitive information, extorting money from users, or interrupting normal business processes. Now you understand how critical cybersecurity is to everything that we do. Where we live, where we play, where we work. We'll go into definitions of what we mean by a smart community, but more importantly, I'm hoping that you've now digested how central security and trust is to how we operate. Go back to the metaphor of the house on the bridge and go back into that house. Security is not just about who's at the front door, it's about who's letting you in. Take this definition and work with it a little more and understand the aspect of business processes. You see, when cybersecurity focuses on business processes, it also focuses on the aspect of governance. How do we structure our work? How do we structure our initiatives? That's the definition from Cisco. And as I'm sure all of you can relate to, it's reminding us about the need to ensure that we have total control and zero trust over the environments that we run. Now, when it comes to examples of smart communities and the uncertainties, I am sure all of you would find it very easy to say, it was very convenient for Ali to look at his backyard right away and point at the Toronto Sidewalks Labs as an example of smart communities not functioning the way they were supposed to. All of you know about Toronto Sidewalk Labs. For those who don't, I'll take a couple of minutes to explain it to you. Started up by Alphabet, been in development, in conception for about 3 to 4 years, had a lot of issues in terms of getting set up, but was part of that movement in Toronto around how can we develop an efficient, smart community. What was the promise? In downtown Toronto, we have an area called the Toronto Waterfront, which has a board of its own. Within that area, Queen's Quay area, 12 acres of land were dedicated or supposed to be dedicated to work to be done by the Toronto Sidewalk Lab. What did the Sidewalk Lab promise? For one, it promised the ability for the roads to be heated, so when it snows, you could have that snow melt right away. It had the promise of having garbage removed without much of the hustle and bustle that we're used to when it comes to our usual garbage removal services. It had the promise of creating efficient housing using wood panels. It had the promise of connecting people virtually in multiple ways. It had the ability, or at least the promise, keyword promise, of reducing our carbon footprint and respecting the environment. All of this in the hub of our urban metropolis. But what happened? As all of you know, a couple of months ago, the project was slashed. And many folks would say, yeah, it was a convenient reality that they could just blame it on COVID. But look at the other aspects of why it got slashed. Besides the aspect that COVID brought up certain realities, there were issues around, more importantly, governance, around privacy, around access. There were issues around trust that got groups to mobilize online and refute the idea of having a sidewalks lab in downtown Toronto. Numerous consultations, in fact, 18 months of consultations happened when Toronto Sidewalks was proposed as an idea. The promise of 44,000 jobs was made at these consultations, but more importantly than that, 18 months of talking to stakeholders. Yet the resistance only grew to certain elements driven by the aspect of trust. And once the project was declared null and not moving forward, you could see various groups come out and say they were proud of the fact that they protested the idea because they weren't sure about the trust and the governance model around Toronto Sidewalk Labs. And I want to draw everybody's attention to the fact that it's not just the Sidewalks Lab that's gone haywire. There are projects in San Francisco, triple worth the amount, that are now kind of not happening or in some jeopardy. More importantly than that, numerous startup ideas had begun from the Toronto Sidewalk Labs, and they're not moving forward. That is the uncertainty that you go into because of the trust and governance models that are required in order for smart communities to be successful. Now, later on, I'll go into this idea of how much buy-in do you need, but to some degree, you need to appreciate that at the very root, you don't invest in strategies or technologies, you invest in people. What makes a smart community is not all the gizmos around it, but the people within it. I promised you that I was going to take you to this aspect of today in history. What's the date today? August 14th. Tomorrow's August 15th. In history today, a very important independence had happened. If you come from the Indo-Pak subcontinent, which is where I come from, you would know that today is Pakistan's independence. And at the stroke of midnight would be India's independence as well. The image that you're seeing over there is the image of people moving between countries or between two lands that are about to become border-controlled countries. You see, if you go back quite a few many years ago, under the British Raj, the British colonial rule, India and Pakistan didn't exist. It was one land called British India, right? After World War II, but prior to even World War II, with some agitation, which movements, but the nonviolence movement by Mahatma Gandhi, the establishment of the Congress Party, the establishment of the Muslim League, you now had a movement to kick the British out of British India. And the politicians came out with a promise, the promise of, we will have better lives, we will have land, we will have access to resources, we'll have access to agriculture, we'll have access to the technologies that we need to independently determine our fates. In fact, when Nehru was giving his opening remarks at the stroke of midnight, which is when India achieved its independence, he made the statement, today we've made our tryst with destiny. a love affair almost with destiny, where he says, now we can pursue our freedoms, what we love, what we want to achieve. The same was happening on the Pakistan side of things, where the celebration was that now we can create a state. Sure, it may be one religious minority, a majority, a Muslim state, but we will be open to multiple ideas. We will be open to multiple cultures. We'll be open to multiple enterprises. That was the promise of what this community was meant to be, India and Pakistan. Neighbors, not competitive, but collaborative with their own identities. Similar to what we try to achieve when we look for the ideal smart community. We look for a community where we're able to achieve more with the benefits of technology, where we can control it, where we can test it, where we can do much more. But what happened in the process of these two countries becoming independent? Lines were drawn to determine the borders. Lines were drawn to move people from one side of the border to the other. And what happened in that process was, in fights for land and in fights for identity, people were displaced. People were moved, not just asked to move, but forcefully moved, violently moved. Khushwant Singh, a famous author, a late author from India, says the partition and the experience of creating community under that partition was almost like going through a major surgery without anesthetic. Because we forgot that besides the trust and the governance model, we forgot about what the people are going to be going through. What will their realities be? Similarly, when we introduce ideas into a community that we're going to now improve, for example, access to services, we're going to improve access to education, we need to be thinking about what is it that the people are going to go through. We create governance, we create trust, but we need to create that importance around consultations and bringing people together. You know, when I speak of this idea of the partition of India, I look at it and say there was a problem around autonomy, a problem around we want to be able to represent ourselves in our own community. See, don't just think about smart communities from the perspective of it's all about technology. We've been engaged in this process of creating community for a very, very long time. At the very start of my talk, I mentioned something where I said, smart communities even goes back all the way to 1930, where very, very smart people were trying to conceive of the ideal way of living. It's important that you recognize the trains over there and the functionality of transportation, the functionality of connectivity that we've been discussing for a very long time, and the uncertainties that govern it and how it can go wrong. Remember I said, don't just think of smart communities as ICT, information communications technology. Think of it as everything that we do on a day-to-day basis. Simple example, 2007, Netherlands. In a bit of a remote community, I don't quite remember the name of the community, and I'll certainly post it up on siberXchange.ca, the community was having troubles with getting access to goods. The problem is that the community had one road in and one road out. A sizable community, but remote. For goods to go in, you had major trucks that were bringing goods in. But because of traffic, because of minimal roadways into the community, it took time, it caused delays, it caused pollution, it caused noise. So the community banded together and decided to form distribution centers across the community so that the trucks could go and drop off some of their load at different distribution centers, and then bicyclists could go, or cyclists rather, could go pick up those goods, or somebody who was walking within a certain vicinity could pick up the good and deliver it, therefore reduce the amount of traffic, of trucker traffic going into the community. For the first instance, that sounded really, really good. Yes, this is a great idea. Let's create this distribution system. Just like today, as we celebrate the independence, you have, yes, let's celebrate this idea. We've got two separate states. I'm not opposed to it. I'm just saying, think about the uncertainties. Now when you've got this idea, let's distribute things in this fashion, suddenly, for the first 2 days, it sounds good. You see less trucks. You see less movement. You see less pollution. But eventually, the trucking companies look at this and say, well, now Because this is a for-profit enterprise that you're running, this is reducing our profits because we charge by distance that we travel. We charge by how much we move into your communities. We charge also by the load that we bring in. You cannot move the amount of load that we're bringing to our distribution centers. This is eating into our profits because now we have to travel even more. And eventually, through a good governance system and through good consultation, that community then figured out a way to do a couple of things. Work closely with their government, make that distribution system into a not-for-profit distribution system, and figure out a better way to use the profits from that system to reinvest it in the roads within that community. That's what I mean when we talk about smart communities. It's not just how do we plug in our communities to a plug-and-play router and suddenly we've got the digital lights on. It's about how do we think cleverly and collectively about the core systems through which we survive. And that's me there, without a beard. And one of the things that I'll tell you is that you can relate my stories to who I am. The way I look at the idea of smart communities is much like how I look at myself as a child without a beard. This is that idea that when you go into the idea of smart communities, you have every right to explore and try your own notions of it. Much like a child, devoid of judgment, devoid of worry, goes and proposes ideas, goes and tries something, but you're able to control and protect any damage that that particular child faces. That's the way I recommend we start thinking about smart communities. There is no framework per se that we can subscribe to that tells us this is the way you're going to have this plug and play and the model's going to work for you. No one-size-fits-all solution. In fact, there is no need to imagine that we constantly have to look at solutions. Let's understand the problems better. Let's play with the ideas a little bit more. You see, what's even more important is that we're having this discussion today, and I've paralleled smart communities all the way back to the independence of India and Pakistan. I'll take it a step further and tell you, in August, one of the most recent North American examples of smart communities goes back to 1993, Silicon Valley. I'm sure all of you are aware of it. Silicon Connects, the Connected Valley, the Smart Valley. How did that happen in Silicon Valley, California? And how was it propelled by San Diego University? You see, what happened in 1993 is that we were coming off the feet of the Cold War. We were coming off quite a few challenges economically, new monetary and fiscal policies, and we were just coming off the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. Many of you may know, I was around 5 years old at the time, living in Dubai. Although Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, doesn't share a border with Kuwait or Iraq, or at least at the time it didn't, and I know it still doesn't. When that invasion happened, oil prices went for a toss. Not just oil prices went for a toss, military spending started to exhaust a lot of the faculties of government. There were challenges everywhere. Cold War has just finished. A country has been invaded, not just invaded, but annexed into the 19th province of Iraq by Saddam Hussein. The world's in turmoil. Fine, after a period of time, the US and the coalition goes in, removes Saddam Hussein, but we're still on the heels of a very difficult economic period. And at that point, in Silicon Valley, you had the movement around smart communities. Again, this is why you have to understand, is that you have to know the problems. You have to understand all of the various feeds that go into creating the problems we are trying to solve. Smart communities, as I said earlier on, doesn't just ask us to look at, do you have internet connectivity? Do you have a laptop? Do you have an iPad? Do you have a keypad that we can install into the door? It asks you about other things as well. What is the economic situation? What are some of the political realities? What can we do to use the tools at our hand to make our lives better? Which is where I come to my positioning on why smart communities have been failing, and what can we do to ensure that it doesn't happen again. If you look at the NIST framework in cybersecurity, it's got 5 fundamental elements to it. You gather, you protect, you detect, you respond, you recover. I missed one, which was identity. Pay attention to this framework and try to work with it as your tool for imagining your smart community. When we talk about identity, ask yourself, How are we going to manage whatever we are proposing and the users and the deliverers of that service? Number two, how are we going to protect each end of that service? The person receiving a service, the person delivering it, and the person in the middle. The question of the third or the last mile. Number three, how are we going to detect where we have challenges? How are we going to detect where we have problems? How are we going to test our methodologies? Number four, how are we going to respond when we see our results? Are we going to see that the community wants more, the community wants change? How will we respond to all of these? And number five, how will we recover in the event that something goes wrong? You see, a lot of folks, if you've read the book, The Age of Speed, when they were talking about biometrics at airports post 9/11 in order to identify someone, 75% of people at the time were nervous about it. You look at contact tracing as well, a good majority of the Canadian community is nervous about this aspect of how is contact tracing going to be used. And when there's fallout, how do we recover? Take that idea of the NIST framework and you'll begin to then realize where it is that various communities have fallen short when it comes to their deployments with smart communities. If you go to California and you look at Silicon Valley, there were 5 things that they focused in on when it came to developing their rationale, and it stayed true to this aspect of the NIST framework. Number 1, they identified their community extremely well. The Smart Valley concept began by drawing a bit of a border around where they wanted their systems to run. They knew the demographics. At the time, 17% of people had access to some form of connected technology. They wanted to bump that up to 85%. Know the identity of the people in the community where you want to impact change. With that process, not only was Smart Valley successful, but Smart Valley was then able to garner more investments. Smart Valley was then able to partner with different organizations in order to grow the concept. And all of you know very well where Silicon Valley sits today. The other element of it, if you look at the protection standpoint, they were able to look at what are the barriers, or what are the kill switches, if I say it better, on when something's going wrong, how will we protect our community? How can we go back to a form where we can still deliver the educational services, the government services? In this process of building Smart Valley, they shifted from about 10% of e-services from a government perspective to nearly 92%. And by doing that, they were also able to look at how can we detect where are we going wrong, where are we falling short. This aspect of knowing how to detect ultimately gave them the confidence with which to work. Then came the aspect of responding and recovering. They had fail-safe measures. More importantly than that, they had ways and avenues to gather feedback from the community, and they had ways and avenues to recover from any elements that went wrong. I would argue that when you study the development of smart communities, you'll kind of see that the ones that have worked have fallen well within this framework of the NIST. Let's look at Canada. Now, in Canada, you have many different forums. You have the ICF, the Intelligent Communities Forum. You have the Smart Communities Forum. You've got many forums that are out there meant to talk and meant to get us engaged on the aspect of what can we do from a smart communities and intelligent communities perspective. In Canada, much of the movement began with the connectivity agenda, the Connected Canada. Much of the focus was on how can we build the elements that are required to get us talking to one another, the telecommunications faculties. As early as 2003, investment started pouring into these elements. And slowly but surely, you started to see private-public partnerships form, kind of like Toronto sidewalks. But if you look around Canada, once the connectivity element was in place, then you realized examples such as the city of Stratford. Then you realize examples such as what you may have seen in Sarnia. Then you realize examples like the Autonomous Vehicle Integrated Network or the 5G rollout networks here in Durham region. The key is ultimately to understand your audience and what their needs are, but to have that feedback loop going. Similar models have been adopted in Australia. Similar models have been adopted in Singapore. Some have worked, some have failed. But at the core of it, where issues have occurred, it's been one of these 5 elements that have got them to realize where they've fallen short. What makes a smart community then? Number 1, stakeholders. Not only do you need to know the citizens in the community, you need to know who they're interacting with. Within a border, who else do we have relationships with? Who else do we rely on? The nature of the borders closing during COVID-19 ultimately gets you to realize how much we rely on the supply chain system. At the core of this is to know what are or who are our stakeholders. The uncertainty of what's happening with our stakeholders ultimately means that we sit, as we develop plans for smart communities, we sit in that level of uncertainty as well. We don't operate in a vacuum. We're not immune from some of the challenges that we face. When it comes to partnerships, not only do we have stakeholders, we have partnerships. Within our communities, we have relationships and partnerships that drive economic growth as well. This aspect of how connectivity and ICT is going to come in to impact these partnerships, which have jobs attached to them, which have livelihood attached to them, all have an element to play in when we shape our smart community. Telecommunications, not just infrastructure to make sure people can stay connected, we also need to make sure that we have the capacity to not just keep them connected, but keep them connected in a secure manner. Keep them connected in a manner in which it is seamless, but in a manner in which it is safe. The minute these elements start to fall on the wayside, you lose trust. But at the core of it is to make sure that your telecommunication systems are robust, reliable, versatile, and diverse, all of which factor in very closely to how any network engineer shapes a network. You see, often you'll find folks who say, as long as the computer's running, we're good to go. And then you've had someone like me say, computers are very, very dangerous in that they just give you answers, they don't let you ask the questions. You need to know the what-if scenarios. You need to know the fail-safes. What happens when you have a smart hospital running or a smart essential service running and the telecommunication structure goes down? You see, one of the major things that you would hear anybody, especially someone with a telecoms background, will tell you that one of the biggest fears that they rest with uneasily is if anything was to happen to our internet exchange points, 151 Front Street. If something was to happen there, how would that impact us? How would we route from there on in? Knowing the what-if scenarios. Choice. The problem that we face with smart communities today is that often we are forced into it. It's are you in or are you in? As communities embrace it, you don't left with much choice. This element of choice has to factor into how we create the rationales on our smart communities. Because when you go in and you decide to determine or you decide that you want to run a service in one particular way as opposed to the other, how did that decision get made and how was the choice wrestled from the end user? It has to be a collaborative, democratic experience. This year at RSA, you would have heard the talk on democratizing cybersecurity. That's because it's not a simple thing to get done. It's something where you have to bring the option of choice, but you have to do it in a constructed manner which allows folks to stay safe. Then you have control, convenience, and competition. Control I've spoken about earlier as well. This element of how do you control the developments within your networks, the developments within your smart communities. I said this before, if you want to go fast, you go alone. You want to go far, you go together. It is a controlled, slow process. In this age of speed and instantaneity, we aim to see results almost right away. It takes time. Then you look at the aspect of convenience. Are we doing something effectively, or are we doing something for technology's sake? And lastly, competition. Because if we do this in a way where we do it right, you foster healthy competition. When you do it wrong, there are numerous cases of sabotage, numerous cases of one vendor against the other, competing against each other for that very core of business. Knowing how to structure the competitive markets that we're in while you roll out smart communities is fundamental to knowing what truly makes a smart community. And as it says verbatim over there, in short, designing a smart city is more than just drawing up plans and starting to build. It's about consultation, it's about communication, it's about collaboration. I'm going to finish off with 3 uncertainties, and then we'll jump into some of the questions that I've been told are already pouring in. The first uncertainty. You've got a farmer there in India who's using a cell phone to declare when a particular crop is ready to be picked up, probably even using a smartphone or a regular phone to dial into a service that could start running his water pump. The speed phenomenon, also known as I hate you, but I want you. One of the biggest challenges or the uncertainties that I've called is this aspect of speed. We assume a lot that because the service is fast, it's instantaneous, we're then able to make it sure, or we're then able to access it in a way where it's useful. The problem with speed today is that once we hit a particular barrier, or once we hit a situation where we no longer have that velocity, we have no way to go back. We have no ability to turn around and understand how can we continue to achieve the same thing while we don't have the same speed. At the root of this is, look at COVID-19 and how that has shifted our ability to do business. That has shifted our ability and how we stay connected. That has shifted the way we think about business today. The same speed with which I could have my rental car company book me in for a rental and even pick me up now gets completely distorted. Now you're not able to pick somebody up in a car without them wearing particular protective gear, and protective gears are not in supply. The problem with speed is that we value it so much that if it's the fastest way to get it done, we'll get it done without knowing what if that same route is not available. And in the case of the Indian farmer, it's not just a matter of what if the towers go down, it's also a question of what if the electricity goes down? And more importantly than that, what if they lose the phone? What if something happens? What is the cost and the time that it's going to take for them to get a replacement? That farmer there definitely is enjoying the benefits of a smart idea, of the concept of getting people together and connected. But when something goes off, that luxury of speed becomes a major barrier. Speaking of speed, speaking of agility, many of you had heard of initiatives around smart communities in Nigeria. Efforts that were looking at how can we reduce greenhouse gas emissions? How can we reduce the carbon footprint of our people? The biggest challenge when it comes to there was, again, the aspect of power. The aspect of not just power, but supply and demand for the products that were needed in order to structure those particular communities. Whether you need a particular type of material, whether you need a particular type of skill set, how long is it going to take you to attain that? How long is it going to take you to ensure that that supply and demand system has a consistency to it? You see, I get this all the time with companies that come to me and talk to me about the fact that, hey, I want to build a product using AI. I want to build a cybersecurity tool that can now proactively detect for anomalies. I want to build something that can show me where I'm going wrong instantaneously and can automate my whole systems. But in order for that system to be trained, it needs a supply of data. At the very core of what we call being smart is our ability to look at data and intelligently compute it, not just as humans, but through a computer itself. I've said this many a time before. With human intelligence, we've been able to tell computers what to think. With artificial intelligence, we've been able to tell computers, here's all the data, you tell us what you think. Every smart community at its very root has data in it. For example, if you want to moderate temperature, if you want to modulate the temperature within a home or within a shopping center, and you want to do it in a smart environment, it has to gather data on foot traffic. It has to gather data on the weather. It has to gather data on how many people are there within the vicinity at a particular point of time. There has to be a supply and demand of data in order for that system to work efficiently. Otherwise, as you've seen in many cases, that particular sensor system may not be able to turn on and turn off at the right times, but when you take this a step further, if we start using smart data applications to assess, I don't know, let's say resumes, but we don't have enough information and we don't have enough live data coming in, that's when cases of bias can come up. That's when cases of racism can come up. That's when cases of denying people access to something on the basis of an algorithm that has not been well thought out. At the core of these uncertainties is the supply and demand of data, the supply and demand of resources. And lastly, alignment, racing across a tightrope. What I mean by this is Go back to the elements of what forms that smart community. Remember, I spoke about the aspect of partnerships. I spoke about the aspects of how do you ensure that you've got your stakeholders in the right space. You see, smart communities is not just about one private sector was able to go and impact a particular community. It's about going collaboratively. It's about ensuring that you've got the government buy-in, you've got the private sector buy-in, you've got the NGO buy-in, you've got the right framework in order to achieve this vision of the smart community. But you're walking a tight rope. You see, nobody is just getting into this space because they're benevolently interested in it. There are motives that drive it. When you walk a tight rope, that's simply because you don't quite know the extent of those motivations. You see, if you look at South Korea, the city of Sakado, if I'm not mistaken, a brilliant idea of where an intellectual smart city could go. And today, they're scurrying to get real estate assets sold out from that community and are selling it almost as an American dream somewhere in South Korea. What do you think was one of the challenges with making sure that that particular smart community was able to prosper? It was this aspect of knowing the motivations. It was that aspect of knowing what's going to happen once all the services are live. What will this return to in other forms with us? You know, I've said this many a time. The promises of yesterday are the taxes of today. What were the promises that were driven by those smart communities? What was the promise driven by all the development that was happening? What was the promise behind all of that investment? And if we don't understand that, the taxes that hit us, I don't mean taxes in terms of physical taxes, but other taxes, mental, psychological, economic, political, all come to bring the whole idea of a smart community down to a full stop. Now you can pay attention to why Cisco also to some extent agrees with me. Let's read this verbatim. Cisco, at its Internet of Things World Forum 2017 in London this week, revealed that 60% of IoT initiatives stall at the proof of concept stage. Only 26% of companies have an IoT initiative that they considered a complete success, while a third of all completed projects were not considered to be a success. The numbers. Not just qualitatively, but quantitatively. Look at the risk ratio that is at play over here. It's not as simple as we've got the next shiniest thing in the world of information and communications technology, you should all be using it. When you build these ICT products, you have to think about everything in that NIST framework, which gets you to think about the social element of our physical technologies. You see, when we say man is a social animal, or human beings are a social animal, we mean that you don't just give them the tools and they work with it. They shape their tools just as much as their tools shape them. If you read deeper into Cisco's analysis about why some of these companies don't make it through, or why some of these ideas fail, the root cause of it is not understanding the deployment piece, not understanding how these technologies need to be integrated. Many times we build technologies, we build ideas for function, for form. We don't quite understand the way in which that particular technology will be maintained and will be sustained. And that represents one of the most dangerous uncertainties, because once you deploy it but don't know how you're going to sustain it, ultimately it's a nice shiny door to walk through, but the roof is very, very unstable, and the bridge that you're on is unstable. Tech-driven, not problem-driven. We're driven by this aspect of it's shiny, it's glossy, let's implement it. Understand the problem first. Do not go about solutioning without understanding the problem. Remember, I spoke about this earlier on, the consulting part, the part where you engage with your partners, the part where you're able to build this together. 18 months of consultation may sound like it was a lot for the Toronto Sidewalks Lab, but could there have been more? Could there have been different forms of consultation? Do not devalue the voice of the citizens whose lives you're trying to change. Unclear implementations, as I mentioned with the Cisco example, not only were the implementations unclear, the end goals were unclear as well. You've developed a machine that screams, but for what purpose? And then the ultimate CapEx versus OpEx. Remember I said earlier on that we develop for function, but we don't develop for maintenance, sustainability. We develop and we buy. We simply purchase or we get into agreements with multi-billion-dollar vendors. We get into agreements with the next best thing in technology, but we don't really know what the total cost of operation is going to be. We're in a race on a tight rope. We hate it, but we still love it because it's an element of competition. It's a moment of nation-state building. Everybody wants to drive behind this idea that we are the smart community of the future. We are the smartest of them all. Little do they realize that you could be very easily outsmarted. And I go back to the NIST in my concluding comments and ask you to think about very carefully when you're developing your smart communities plan on the identity, protection, detection, response, and recovery that is embedded within your communities. I'll close with a statement that I think captures the true value of what we mean when we talk about let's get into this practice of building a smart community. When you looked at the definitions, what did it tell you? A smart community is about people. A smart community is about ways of life. A smart community is about how we engage with government, how we engage with hospitals, how we engage with education facilities, how we engage with each other. It's an element of supply and demand. But it's an element where we begin to look at what's the best way to improve our lives, with technology or without technology. Thinking about our communities in a smart way and the partnerships and the stakeholders that we have. When you look at the uncertainties, you've realized very quickly the uncertainties lie in the fact that we don't know enough, we've not been consulted enough, and that we've made purchases on a very fast, rapid environment, interested in having the smart label tagged to us. My recommendation is, until you're certain about what that definition of smart is, do not get into this uncertainty. Understand what you are trying to achieve and the impact that you're trying to create. That is one of the fundamental ways you will find some level of success. And when you find failures 7 times, you'll be able to get up the 8th time. You've heard me say this before, and I'll say it again, is that you have to look at, when you look at this child over there taking a picture of that flower, perhaps that picture could just become something which becomes part of an album. Perhaps it could be an app that she's using to learn a little bit about that flower. There's so much already that's around us that we can work with. Why do we always need to think about how do we just implant a new product to make it better? How can we work with what we have and then grow from there? I don't focus, when it comes to discussions on smart communities, on the aspect of look at the harvest that we've reaped today. I look at what are the seeds that we're planting for tomorrow. And those seeds that we plant should germinate the flowers of consistency, the flowers of equality, the flowers of equity, the flowers where everybody's able to enjoy the sidewalks, everybody's able to participate and take in the beauty of what we've created as leaders in our community. You know, a famous saying that I'll close with goes as follows. Sometimes you have to look at a flower in order to understand the decisions that you make. Be like that flower that gives its fragrance even to the hand that crushes it. Let's not be that hand. Let's be that flower. Farwa, I believe there are some questions that have come in. I'll turn it over to you, and I'll be right here to answer them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ali. So we have a couple minutes left, and we have 1 or 2 questions that we can go through first. Why is governance often one of the key areas where smart communities fail?
Okay. So remember I said earlier on that it's not just about the fact that you've got people, you've got policies and procedures that have to be followed. Governance ultimately ties to accountability. Governance ultimately ties down to procedures, ties down to processes. The aspect that you're seeing a lot that's happening with smart communities from my perspective is, again, what I said earlier on, is that we are fixated with this element of let's just buy more and more of product, let's buy into more and more ideas. Governance becomes an issue because not only do we not know or have good vendor management practices in place, we don't have a lot of examples that we work with. The sharing is good. There are numerous forums in which we can share, in which we can talk, and we can collaborate. But the race is still on. Everybody's trying to go one step ahead of the other, which I understand in a competitive element is how you want to operate. I understand that piece. But there has to be a level of governance that makes sure that the way decisions are made, the way products are reviewed, the way projects are taken on, all have to follow a certain level of governance that then make us accountable. Secondly, it's extremely difficult to even audit how do you go about technology innovation in this manner? If you're creating one product with a particular goal, a bit of a different story, but when you're trying to create and recreate core elements, multiple elements of a society, you need to have governance structures in place that ensure accountability is possible and that these things can get audited. I'm not one to say that I was rejecting the Sidewalks Labs project or not. I'm just going by what you see in terms of the data. The elements that you notice is, again, yes, there was a lot of consultations with Toronto Waterfront. Yes, there were a lot of data that was provided. But again, what was the governance structure like? What was the structure in place to ensure that the decisions made could be audited? What was the accountability in place when from 12 acres of land, the ask went to much more in order to achieve the goals of a smart city and a smart campus? And when you have more and more examples of this, people get a little nervous, people get uneasy. And the other aspect of governance is also to understand is that these projects of smart communities are very, very sensitive. It's literally like taking over core essential applications, critical infrastructure, and replacing them in a certain way. When you do something like that, and then you have attrition, you have staff moving, so on and so forth, having sound governance makes sure that the idea remains what its original idea was, or the changes are being communicated. That's one of the reasons I think governance is at the core of why you see a lot of failures when it comes to smart communities, and it's one of the biggest uncertainties. Next.
So much for that. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time left, but we have a few more questions, and I'll be posting them onto the siberXchange platform. And I'd love to get your responses on that platform as well. Just back to you for some closing remarks.
In closing, I'm going to thank the team at CyberX, but I'm also going to thank the folks at Phelpsgroup. One of the elements that I spoke about entirely through this piece was the focus on people, and the focus on people that know how to work with frameworks, but also know how to innovate within them. If you get a moment today and you're on siberexchange.ca, the team at the Phelps Group will post a couple of positions with regards to cybersecurity roles in downtown Toronto, but across the city and across the country as well. Take a moment to look at those roles. They are hiring for certain positions, and look at not just the technical aspects of it, look at the code of ethics that is embedded within it. Look at the understandings of technology that are embedded within it. Look at the need for these security professionals to have those soft skills that Jayson was talking about earlier on. Remember, I said this yesterday, it's not just about getting that title. The title doesn't give you the honor, you honor the title. Understand your skill sets, take a look at those postings that are going to go live on siberexchange.ca, and feel free to engage with both myself, but also the folks at the Phelps Group to learn more about how you can play a role from a security perspective in shaping smart communities and addressing the uncertainties that we currently find ourselves on. I'm not one to subscribe to building a house on a bridge, but we are at a bridge right now, and we need to figure out, do we go left or we go right? And we can do it with leadership and ethical guidance and technical skill sets, well composed and well comprised in those descriptions that you're about to read from the Phelps Group. Thank you very much, and thank you to the town of Ajax for making this happen. I'll see you in the next sessions.